We are currently on a plane, but we aren't sure of the destination ahead. We look at the left and see inflation numbers way above the same average that seem to go down since their peak, but still higher than before the pandemic. Interest rates in Canada and the US striking us at levels last seen more than 20 years ago. Thus we look at the right. Unemployment stays at lows after having fallen the cliff of the COVID-19. Real GDP seems back on track, even if slightly increasing in 2023. Where are we going? It's the subject of today's video. You'll learn more on what has guided us where we are currently standing. And at the end, I'll give you my opinion on whether we'll be landing softly or crashing abruptly. Hi everyone, my name is Jeremy and today I'm super excited to show the synthesis of this research that honestly has taken me a lot more time than expected. Let's go through it, but before, don't forget to hit the like button below. It's one of the best and easiest ways to support my work. In the first place, let's try to understand what is an economic soft landing, the given alternative to a crash. I humbly say try because when I did the research, I was astonished to see the number of mistakes and imprecision between the views. Here is all what I understood. Investopedia characterizes one as when the central bank seeks to raise the interest rates just enough to stop an economy from overheating and experiencing high inflation without causing a severe downturn. It's the ultimate goal of the Fed, slowing down the economy as painlessly as possible, avoiding harsh consequences, namely unemployment and spending. Let's try the least worst. And it was exactly what was happening at a high level a few months ago. And even currently, even if the situation is less out of control, the economy is still boiling right now. Inflation numbers were close to 10%, and unemployment at lows last seen multiple decades ago. This simply means that people work in increasing numbers, increasing hours to afford the increasing cost of living. You probably understand the dynamics. If the Federal Reserve increases too high, too soon the interest rates, this would lead to the complete opposite, to a hard landing. Both scenarios are screened by many networks.
Well, I think we are seeing a soft landing in terms of economic data.
Here's the issue. I do believe we go into recession. I don't believe there'll be a soft landing.
Baseline assumption is a soft landing, not a hard landing or recession.
But the reality of it is nobody knows 100% what's going on because we've never been here before.
The crash scenario being an abrupt recession with the paired disastrous consequences as unemployment, bankruptcies, deflation. But it all depends on the crisis. Each one is entirely unique, different. However, one thing sure, we want to avoid it as much as possible. But right now, opinions are shared, whether we're heading for growth or trouble. I'll now give you 3 weaknesses of the Fed's intervention that also imply that a soft landing is highly unlikely. First, the advent of the outcome of monetary policies, thus their impact, is a literal time bomb. When the Fed increases the interest rates, it's exactly as if it would administer a medicine that has a 1 year or more lag for its effects to be felt. In fact, you don't even know when and if you'll be healed, because the dosage is so complicated. 1 basis point, 50 basis points, 100 basis points, yada yada yada. How much should we increase or decrease the rates? But the Federal Reserve often acts far more quickly, as it increased the rates more than 10 times for the last 2 years. Yes, there's always speculation, expectation, and anticipation, but the real economical impacts are felt a lot later, and they have a way heavier significance than a mere stock price fluctuation. So Fed's interventionism is a drug on a timer, whose impact is hard to assess in the short term when we need the information to take action further. That brings us to the second point. Honestly, the curve and its outcomes breadth is mostly uncontrolled. With great power comes great responsibility. Parker. As a Carvel needed to do so frequently, the Fed navigates visually, but only with the void in front of it, so basically, blindly. Ben Bernanke, former chair of the US Federal Reserve, has already said that if making monetary policy is like driving a car, then the car is one that has an unreliable speedometer, a foggy windshield, and a tendency to respond unpredictably and with a delay to the accelerator or the brake. Thus, succeeding to land softly is more like a speculation case than coming from well-established principles and rules. And finally, the Fed has a highly heterogeneous record in accomplishing soft landings during the past rate increase cycles. Because there aren't any precise definition of exactly what is a soft landing, since the Second World War there appears to have been only one real soft landing achieved by the US. It happened in 1994, when the Fed increased the interest rates from 3% to 6%. Then a year later, to avoid a continued unnecessary economic slowdown, cut it 3 times. And bingo! The next few years would make Uncle Ben proud of us because of economic growth. It may seem easy when told this way, but we need to remember the Fed was required to act blindly, continuing to modify the rates without gauging the complete impacts of previous changes. Saying that you only have to increase the rates when the economy is overheating and decreasing them when a stimulus is required is like saying, you know what? Investing is simple. You only need to buy stocks when they're low and sell them when they're high. And yeah, enjoy the ride. Now we'll take these 3 elements, throw them to the garbage, and see why maybe we'll achieve the miracle of a soft landing for the second time in US history. In one word, US and Canadian economies have stayed resilient, even with the economic chaos. According to me, the present situation could have been exponentially worse. And let's talk about the first reason why we may be expecting a smooth landing. How we've been fighting since around 2 years a possible economic catastrophe that almost no one has remarked. Between the 2007-2008 financial crisis, the Great Depression, the Tulipomania, and most other crises, there is something in common. They mostly all began by a period of prosperity that has been transformed into a bubble of more or less significant magnitude. And what happens to a bubble? It doesn't last and bursts rapidly. Now let's make a link with what we've lived in the last few years. During the COVID-19, Canadians and Americans faced significant hindrances. Fear, anxiety, lockdowns, economic disruptions. And to prevent a protracted dark period, the governments needed to act. The market exuberance was artificial, created by governments all around the world terrified by the mere idea of an economic disaster caused by the pandemic. And it's totally normal. So yeah, COVID could have caused, in fact, has caused economic turmoil. But governments probably weren't expecting the following. Here is a graph indicating how low the inventory of goods in the United States was during the pandemic. And that for 2 reasons. One, the large number of supply chain disruptions in multiple industries. You probably fairly greatly remember the news about all the containers stuck in port. And 2, the increased demand. Mostly because the average individual had more money in her pocket due to different programs and incentives as the CERB or CWLB in Canada. Now, this was the artificial prosperity we are talking about. We have avoided an economical disruption linked to the lockdown, people stopping to work and businesses to create wealth, but we forgot one capital element: human nature. With retrospection, businesses reacted in a very human way, incoherently, according to the bullwhip effect model. But it's not totally their fault. Simply many lost insight, which is normal. Governments didn't contact them personally in order to explain the situation. And this is why you need to subscribe to this channel. Little differences in demand at the consumer level frequently engender progressively demand up the scale of the supply chain, from the retailer to the distributor, passing by the manufacturer and the raw material provider. Now you have 2 ways to imagine the bullwhip effect. Imagine you are facing a herd of wild beasts. If you decide to take out your whip and annoy the group, I don't know why you do this, it is highly likely at least one will decide to charge at you, which will lead to more. And before you get it, you'll be a part of a Lion King Disney scene, without an happy ending. Exactly the same as the number of units ordered growing from the retailer up to the raw material provider. Maybe it's a little far-fetched, but it's a kind of a compounding exponential effect. There is also the shape of the whip, which translates into when whipping, a small difference in movement engenders a larger one at the other side. So during the COVID, retailers saw their shelves emptying before their very eyes. commanded a lot more, expecting the boom to continue, but the economic spin-off slowed down because of government intervention. This was what happened with toilet paper in some grocery stores when people were buying 5 boxes of ultra soft toilet paper. The retailer as soon afterwards commanded more, following the short-lived demand, leading to an accumulation of stock. Here's now the outcome. Exploding inventories both in Canada and the United States. And this could have led to a serious crisis, having a primary cause in concordance with the Great Depression, an inventory buildup, and economic slowdown. But that isn't fortunately the case. Phew. But yet, according to the IV Inventories Index, reflecting the Canadian economy with 175 participants, since Q2 2022, the stocks are decreasing, or at least the growth in inventories has slower. Which is reassuring, because when there's fewer items for sale in the warehouse, you'll need to renew them in the future. But if we look at it closer, especially in the US, the situation is still worrying. Because yes, the inventories are stabilized, but they're still at troubling levels. We can imagine the current economic situation as being relatively balanced. Inventories are high, but consumption too. And that's our second reason why a soft landing seems to be possible. The main cause why we haven't plunged into a rude recession yet is because of our resiliency. The number of jobs has increased. Our labor market stays robust with low unemployment. Wages are growing faster than inflation in USA and Canada. And as Professor Fraser Johnson said, stable supply chain we have. Not in a Yoda way, but almost. And it's all for those reasons that the weight at the positive side of the balance remains consequent. At the beginning, I promised you to give my opinion on the topic, and I'm a man of honor, even if only a poor content creator. We've seen until now the positive and negative, and my conclusion is personally, I think a soft landing is possible due to the reasons seen earlier, but highly improbable because of the odds stacked against us. On the other hand, we haven't felt the complete harmful consequences of the latest interest hikes. The story isn't finished yet. According to the Canadian government, I guess my source is reliable, most Canadians have mortgages locked in at 5 years or less, which means that in the next few years, many will see their purchasing power being negatively affected by the increased rent or mortgage payments. The next employment and spending quarter figures in the US and Canada will be a great part of the economic omen. But personally, I would expect, because Canadians and Americans are already strained by the current economic situation, or unless the economy doesn't improve further, or a mild recession, or a strongly lowered economic growth for the next few years. Our world has never been as interconnected as currently, and this brings more challenges. The way how the central banks react to commodity prices volatility, and the consequences of the revival of certain wars that many thought buried will lead to uncertainty. We can't have control on the uncontrollable. Ciao! Now that you have a clearer economic portrait, go see this video to better understand why we are where we are today, the impact on bonds and stocks, and discover a plausible investing opportunity.